factors on Tuesday. Today we're going to give that some application, how that impacts leadership. So leading across cultures, leading in different cultures looks different, in part because of these different cultural dimensions. In fact, Hofstede makes this comment that the very qualities that make someone good at leading in one culture, a monoculture, sometimes inhibits them in leading across cultures. And so he talks a little bit about, it's kind of like playing an instrument. When you're functioning in one culture, you learn how to play one instrument well. And so you become very proficient in that instrument. But when you go to a different culture, it's like playing other instruments. There are some similarities, but there's a lot of differences. And so you have to take a step back and develop sort of different skills and different attitudes to function well in these other cultures. So even the definition of leadership differs among cultures. So if we think about that for a bit, a goal-oriented culture would define leadership along the lines of accomplishing a task through people. That would be good leadership. We're getting the job done. We're using people to do that. But if you're a relationship-oriented society, that doesn't really work well. A relationship-oriented society would focus much more on leadership being an ability to build alliances and friendships. That would be the key thing. Task will happen out of that. But these things would be what would be valued and prized more. Societies with a low tolerance for ambiguity would insist on a precise definition. Let's clearly define it. And what are the parameters of leadership, all that. But if you're a society with a high tolerance for ambiguity, who even needs a definition? It's a fuzzy thing anyway. We're fine. Let's just move forward. Joshua Bonucco or something like that says this: cross-cultural leadership is a school from which you never graduate. So when you are leading in different cultures, you are always learning. Another thing to think about is that though the definitions and styles of leadership differ in different cultures, things like the value of love and selflessness, they apply across cultures. And problems with love and selflessness exist in a variety of cultures. So style doesn't dictate whether a style is not particularly selfless or selfish, but how we use that style can either be selfish or selfless. So a paternalistic leader might be very selfless and loving, whereas an egalitarian leader, that tries to have everybody on the same level, can be very manipulating and selfish. So the style is not good or bad, but how we use it and putting biblical values into that style is key. So culture and leadership values. Here's just some thoughts about leadership values relating to culture. No culture can boast of leadership values that are completely biblical. We talked a little bit about that before, that within culture, we all have sinful natures. And so we all gravitate away from the biblical way of doing life, doing it well. All right? So there's no kind of one culture that exhibits the biblical way to lead. 2, all cultures are based on some biblical values. So you can find biblical values in cultures. Communalism, is that a biblical value? We find that in the book of Acts too, where the early church lived in community with one another. They did life well, giving and caring for everyone. People had needs. means people gave into the general pot and they were cared for. Individualism, is it a biblical value? Yeah. Abraham was an individual called by God. Through him, God would use this individual to impact every nation. So we see both these values. Now, some cultures gravitate toward one and other cultures gravitate toward the other. But we can find a biblical value in each of these. 3, cultures exhibit many differences in leadership values. If you think about a European leader, what kind of values do you think would be exhibited in a European leader? Any thoughts? How would you distinguish between a European leader and an American leader?
Royalty.
Pardon?
Royalty.
In some European countries, yes, loyalty is a high value. Yeah. And
We're just thinking of different types of government.
yeah, there are different types of government. There are some similarities, but some differences. And depends on the country in Europe. Any other thoughts?
Loyalty? I don't know.
Loyalty?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what
Oh, I
Michelle
just said
said.
loyalty.
Oh, did you say something different?
Oh, I said royalty. I
Oh,
thought she
royalty.
said loyalty.
Yeah, she said loyalty. You're saying royalty,
Yes.
sorry.
No, you're fine. Yeah.
Yeah, so we do have that. Wonder how that plays out in leadership.
I don't know. I just thought of it like Queen of England or I don't know.
Yeah, I'll bet it does have an impact on leadership styles. We thought that through. One of the interesting things about Europe is it's like the United States in size, and now they're all kind of unified. They've got the European Union, but it's not like the United States because it has all these different languages and cultures that are close to each other. So Europeans have had to learn how to work together and work across those cultural barriers. And so they have a higher value in collaboration and learning how to work with people who function from different perspectives. Probably better than Americans do. We tend to be our way or the highway, always the best way, period. So, all right. Number 4, cultures have some leadership values in common with other cultures. Most cultures contain, number 5, leadership values that intersect with those of other cultures and also follow biblical principles. So, can you think of any leadership values that might be found in a lot of cultures that would be biblically oriented values?
Loving people, loving each other.
Okay, yeah, loving people.
Marriage.
Is that a
None.
leadership value?
Oh,
That's just a
no.
value.
Yeah, it's just a value.
Partiality
Impartiality, okay,
towards the people.
yeah. And different cultures are going to approach those differently. Honesty probably is a value, but in some cultures, we think they're not honest.
Integrity.
But they probably are honest, it just fleshes out differently. Their understanding of honesty would be different than ours. Yeah, integrity, yeah. Servant leadership is the biblical, that's sort of the biblical model. Jesus said, if you want to be first, be servant of all. The Gentiles lord it over one another, but not so among you. You need to be the servant of all. Well, that's sort of the biblical model, I think, of leadership, and it applies to all cultures. It just applies differently. So, yeah, we tend to think, well, that means egalitarian leadership, where we're all sort of on the same level, is the biblical value, and that more reflects the biblical value, but it doesn't. Like I said earlier, you can be very manipulative and self-serving with an egalitarian model. Very much about your own interests, not about the interests of others, not about serving others. Same with a patriarchal culture. You could have in a patriarchal culture, the leader could be very much a servant of the people that he serves, even though there's high power distance, there's a hierarchical structure. Or he could be very much like many of the dictators in African countries that are in a patriarchal culture. It's all for their benefit and not for the people. All right, so culturally conditioned leadership expectations. There's some metaphors that people have articulated to give kind of definition to different styles of leadership that we find in different places in the world. And one of those is using metaphors relating to Greek gods, just for a clever kind of approach. So one of those styles would be the Zeus leader. That's a paternalistic father figure who has these behaviors. They might act impulsively, they act intuitively, they value loyalty in followers, and develop leaders through apprenticeships. Come and serve in my organization, I'll mentor you. They're usually benevolent, they're seeking the good of family, of the employee. They treat employees like family if they're this style. And in response to that, followers are expected to be loyal to them as the leader. Now, what cultural dimensions creates this kind of style of leadership? High context, high power distance, high tolerance for ambiguity. Those things create this kind of style as the preferred style of leadership. This is the kind of leadership style I see in West Africa all the time. Number 2 would be Apollo, the god of order and rules. And so this kind of leadership behavior would have these things. They would be a policy officer. They would love systems, love job descriptions, thick manuals, organizational charts, forms, precise standards. They value predictability and logical analysis. And so the dimensions that would create this kind of leader are individualism, high power distance, and low tolerance for ambiguity would create these types of leaders. So, number 3, Athena. That's the team coordinator of a commando unit. And the behaviors of this style would be they're a problem solver, they're a proactive group leader with a consultative style. The cultural dimensions that create this kind of leadership style is collectivism, a low power distance, and high tolerance for ambiguity. So you see the connection between these dimensions, these cultural dimensions, and the behaviors that they create for leadership? There's an interesting correlation. So Dionysus is the individualist. The behaviors of this style is that the organization exists to help the individual achieve personal goals. There's no boss in the group. Work with coordinators. Each person can have a veto to a decision. Individuals work in loose-knit partnerships. Now, like I said before, cultures, different kinds of organizations have different cultures as well. So we might think on a national basis, but if we think on an organizational basis, there are certain organizations that tend toward this style of leadership, such as university professors in secular schools. It probably doesn't function quite the same in a private university, but But think about that.
Do you mind going over that again?
Yeah, I will. So think about these two professions, university professors and medical doctors. Because you'll have a consortium of medical doctors, and this tends to be how they function. Organization exists to help individuals achieve personal goals. No boss in the group. Work with coordinators. Each person can have a veto to a decision. Individuals work in loose-knit partnerships. All right, the dimensions that create this style is highly individualistic, low power distance, low context. So we in America would tend to fall in that, but we don't always, depending on the organization we're serving in. Okay, so there's another way to look at it, another set of metaphors to describe leadership styles. And the first is the family culture. This is a hierarchical and personal style of leadership. So the characteristics here are relationships are face-to-face, and they're power-oriented. The company is a family with responsibility to take care of employees who are expected to be loyal and obedient. Now, the dimensions that create this, would this be high context or low context? Yeah, high context. Would it be collectivistic or individualistic? Collectivistic, okay. Would it be high power distance or low? High or low power distance? High, yes. Sorry, Michelle, you were answering all the other ones. So
No, I put my
yeah,
thumb up.
that's good, they weren't seeing you. You can cover your thumb so nobody sees it.
I know.
All right, folks, wake up over there. Would this be a high tolerance for ambiguity or a low tolerance for ambiguity? It's actually a high tolerance for ambiguity. Because you don't have to worry about it. The leader knows. They'll tell us what to do. I don't have to worry about it. Okay, the countries that exhibit this style of leadership, Japan has this style, France has this style, and Spain has this style. Number two, the Eiffel Tower culture, which is bureaucratic and hierarchical. It's like the Eiffel Tower, which is narrow at the top, wide at the bottom. And so the leader does not need to be personal or personable. The company values efficiency and achievement of goals. Decisions are logical and they follow the rules. You can think, how many of you have been to the Eiffel Tower? Well, you've seen it. And you got all this steel structure, it's just rigid. All right. Oh, I've been. Yes, tell me. All right. Dimensions that create this kind of culture. Low context or high context? Low, that's right. Because the rules are specifically stated. Here's the bureaucracy. Okay, would this be communal or individualistic? Yeah, individualistic. High power distance or low power distance? And high. Yeah, because it's hierarchical.
Okay.
So you have, this guy at the top, you got the peons down here. Low tolerance or high tolerance for ambiguity? What do you think? Well, this relates to the fact that it's low context, so it would be a low tolerance for ambiguity. Countries that exhibit the Eiffel Tower style of leadership would be Germany and Austria. Number three, is the guided missile culture, which is egalitarian and project-oriented. So characteristics of this: leaders are coordinators of experts and loyal to the profession more than to each other or to the company. When a specific task is completed, they may leave their coworkers and change to another company. So, what do you think? Dimensions. Is this high or low context? What do you think? It's low context. And is it individualistic or is it communal? Individualistic. Yes. Very individualistic. There's no loyalty to the group, to the organization. Once the project's done, I can leave, I can go somewhere else. All right. Is it low power distance or high power distance? Low power distance. Yeah. And is it high tolerance for ambiguity or low tolerance for ambiguity? It is low tolerance for ambiguity. So, this is, what countries would this, do you think, be? What?
America?
Yeah, United States, absolutely. Right here.
The US.
Here and Britain.
Yep, sounds about right.
So these are countries that exhibit that. Another one is the incubator culture. This is based on the idea that organizations are secondary to the fulfillment of the individuals in that organization. So companies are incubators of self-expression and self-fulfillment. This is very personal and egalitarian. The most skilled person becomes the leader. And examples, we'd see that like in startup companies in Silicon Valley, these tech companies. The person who becomes the leader is the one who is highly skilled in the tech stuff. Or medical practices, where you have this consortiums of doctors. The best doctor tends to become the leader of the group. Not because they have leadership skills, but because they're a technical expert. All right, the dimensions of this. High context or low context? What do you think? This one's high context. Low power distance or a high power distance?
Low power distance.
Low power distance, yeah. Is it individualistic or collectivistic? It is collectivistic, yes. And is it low tolerance for ambiguity or high tolerance for ambiguity? Yeah, high tolerance for ambiguity. And the country that this is found in probably best is Sweden. That represents this particular. So, any questions on those? Fascinating ways to think about how different countries will exhibit different styles of leadership. One isn't necessarily better than the other. It's based on their particular cultural dimensions. So, that would bring us then to discussing some skills in leading across cultures. We have our own culture. We tend to be the guided missile culture, or to use the other phrase, we tend to be the Dionysus culture for leadership. Okay, but if we go into other contexts and they're leading from different styles, that's going to create conflicts with us. And so how can we lead well when we cross into those other cultures? The first is we need to develop the skill of restraint in passing judgment. So we've got to hold back and not make an evaluation for the behaviors that we see. We've talked about that already. But some things that back that up is, one is called role theory, which says that the initial leader expectations of a newcomer strongly influence the future of that relationship. So when we choose to think positively when we engage someone in another culture and in a leadership capacity, that start of saying, I'm gonna, even though that feels funny, that behavior looks different and I don't understand it, by withholding judgment and being positive about that relationship, the long-term relationship is going to be positive. Hofstede says that one of the reasons restraint is difficult for leaders is because success at home is often based on strong, quick, firm opinions. So a leader in his own culture is valued because he's able to assess the situation and intuitively has a response. This is the way it is. Let's move forward. That worked. That's right. That doesn't work. That's not the way we're going to go. But that doesn't work when you go across cultures. So your own success in being a great leader here may hinder you and make you a bad leader there. Because you've got to do something that is against what you would do to be effective here. Number 2 is beneficence, which is communication of respect by behaving in thoughtful and courteous ways. It's basically simply just being kind in another culture, being courteous in another culture. There was a group of Canadian technical experts that were found that it was discovered when they were studied, they went overseas and what they found was the greatest factor of success that they could identify for these Canadian technical experts when they went to another country and having success in that other country was how was their feelings and their approach toward their fellow workers before they left. If they were kind and caring to their compatriots, their fellow workers, in the pre-departure training, then they seem to be, those are the ones who did the best in a cross-cultural environment. If they were kind to each other here, then they're going to be kind to others there. People who generally behave in thoughtful and courteous ways in their own culture will do so in others. And that gets you a long way. Just being kind. So, number 3, some other skills. Political skill. The ability to influence effectively through persuasion, manipulation, and negotiation. So, this includes the mastery of public face, your face, to enable situationally appropriate behavior, such as even controlling your own physical expression of emotion. When something happens, don't look shocked. Master your face. Keep smiling. Act like nothing happened. And then process and learn. Mastery of your own face. Ready? All right. Number 4, inquisitiveness. Inquisitiveness has to do with not being overwhelmed by diversity, but invigorated by the differences that you see among cultures. Some people, they go to a different place, they shut down. This is too different, they go to a different country and it's like, where's the McDonald's? I want to find something that's comfortable and familiar, and this is just overwhelming. But there are other people, they don't want McDonald's. No, we want to go to the side street and eat at the little restaurant. Well, I might be sick for a week, but I want to learn, want to be immersed in the culture. I was listening to a interview with Bill Clinton, who was actually a very good global leader. he was good at working with other countries. Probably unlike George Bush. One of the differences between these two guys is George Bush was pretty rigid, and Bill Clinton was pretty fluid. And so George Bush, he was very decisive. He could make a decision and drive toward it, but that's not always the best when you're working across cultures. But Clinton had the ability to really work differently in different places. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all in dealing with other countries, but really assessing the situation and figuring out. We're seeing that right now, right, with Syria, Egypt. You can't deal with both of those scenarios the same. And so we've got a lot of discussion going on about what do we do. And so but a good global leader is patient and thinks through everything and thinks about culture and thinks about all the nuances of what's going on here. But Bill Clinton, in his interview, talked about when he travels overseas, he loves to have a day off where he can just hit the streets and go down the side streets and get immersed in the culture. That's part of it's an insight into why he's a good leader, a good global leader. When I went to Israel, my brother-in-law went with me. This was 2006. We went on this tour. We're traveling across Israel, and my brother-in-law, he asked all the stupid questions because he was really inquisitive. But before long, I began to think those weren't stupid questions, because all those stupid questions led to great discoveries. As he would ask the stupid question, the tour guides, been doing this forever, would begin to talk about things that were incredibly insightful. So pretty quick, I was feeding all my stupid questions to Brad to ask because I didn't want to ask him. But that makes for it's a good global leadership skill, is to be inquisitive. Another guy I knew here in town was over a multinational corporation, and he lived in Europe for a number of years. And one day I was having lunch with him, and he made this comment to me. He said, "I think I drove my employees crazy because I was always asking 1,000 questions." Well, his employees might have been driven crazy, but that made him a great global leader. That made him really effective in leading a multinational corporation because he was inquisitive. He was always digging in, trying to learn more, discover more. So asking questions. So seeks out understanding of the differences. Asks lots of questions. So that's a fourth skill. Fifth skill is perspective. Perspective is that ability to see both local and global views at the same time, simultaneously. And this really comes out of the literature that's talking about the ability to function in a multinational corporation, because that's what's happening in our globalization. We've got a lot of multinational corporations where you've got headquarters in one country, and they're working from that cultural perspective, but they have offices in these other countries working with nationals in those countries that are thinking from different perspectives. If you are in a missions organization, you're going to have the same challenge, because you're going to be based here in the States. You're going to be working with donors in America who are funding this great mission work that you're doing in other places. And those donors come from a certain perspective. There are certain things that will motivate them to give. You have a board of directors here in the States that tend to be Americans that all are motivated or think according to this culture. So you've got to have the ability to translate what's happening overseas into this culture and communicate in a way using verbiage and concepts that really connect with the donors or the board members here. But when you're over there, it often doesn't work the same way. Time is a whole different situation, right? We've talked about monochronic and polychronic time. You know, board members here, they think in monochronic terms. But the reality is when you're on the field, you're working with people that think in polychronic terms. And so time is not an issue. There aren't deadlines like we have in America. So balancing these two and being able to function in both at the same time. So it's, in many ways, it's the ability to manage uncertainty, because that creates a tension and puts you in a flex. Number two, the ability to manage the tensions that exist between cultures and between the local and global demands of an organization. So that's perspective, being able to think both in your home culture and in this culture and balance the two. That makes for a good global leader. Number 6 is character. How to function well in leading across cultures. Character counts. And character is the ability to earn trust in another culture. Can people trust you in that culture? Remember, you're coming in and you're naturally going to function from your cultural perspective. You're going to be doing things naturally that don't fit for them, that they think is weird, that feels awkward to them. They're going to look at your life and they may look down at you, just as we look down at other cultures. They have that ethnocentric perspective. And so they're naturally going to distrust you, right? So how do you earn trust in another culture? Character. One of the ways is establishing emotional connection with people, connecting on an emotional level. It's about real relationship, right? Real care, real connection with people. That builds trust, which means people see you as a person of character. Demonstrating personal integrity. So living a life that shows integrity. Those two things. Did you get those? Okay. Number 7 is savvy. The ability to see opportunities in other cultural contexts and to know how to capitalize on them. So that's also a global skill. To be able to recognize where there's an opportunity and seize the moment. And as future missionaries, that's exactly what you want to be able to do. You want to have savvy. You want to be able to see the opportunities that are there for the gospel and then take advantage of it, maximize it. Okay, so how do you build those leadership competencies? Those are 7 skills that you need to be effective at leading across cultures. Well, what are some ways that develop those particular skills in your life? So I'm drawing from these 4 things that I'm going to talk about, come out of the literature on global leadership. There's a whole subset of leadership studies that deals with just this topic of global leadership. First is travel. Extensive foreign travel. Getting overseas, of course. But the key is not quantity, but quality. What kind of quality are you experiencing? Because there's a lot of people who, in the secular world, could be in the Christian world too, who when they travel, they go overseas and they stay isolated from the culture. They look for the McDonald's. They are an expat who goes and lives in a place where There's a foreign compound. Some countries require that. You go to a place like Saudi Arabia, they want you to live in a foreign compound. They want to isolate you, which keeps you away from the people, and then you live in this bubble. You don't get that kind of cross-cultural experience because you're going to the English store to buy your groceries, and you're going to the English pool to play. You're not interacting throughout the day, throughout the evening, throughout the weekend with people from the local culture. And so it's quality, not quantity. Do you get out and do you immerse yourselves in that culture? All right, so travel is one of them. So how to maximize it? Take detours, get off the beaten path, get wet by diving into the culture through shopping, through education, through living in host homes, all those kind of things. When we went to China in the early 90s, spent a year and a half in China, the Chinese government, they wanted to isolate us from the culture. They put us in, we worked for the Fushun Petrochemical Company. They had a staff and workers college. Engineers would take a semester off, come and study English with us. So they took their headquarters building and they took some of the offices and made them into our apartment. And we lived in that apartment for a year and a half. At the beginning of every semester, the Waiban, the foreign affairs person, would come into our class. And in Chinese, our students would tell us this later, in Chinese he would give the speech. Learn English from these professors, but don't invite them to your home. Don't spend time with them outside of class. Because there was a real intentionality to protect the Chinese from Western culture. They wanted the English, they wanted the English speakers, but they didn't want the other Christian influence. They knew we were Christians. And at that time, that was a big deal in China, with it being communist. So it was an attempt to isolate us. Students still would break the rules and have us over to their house. We'd go do that. But it inhibited us in our being immersed in the culture. 2 is teams. A lot of global executives say that this is even more valuable than traveling overseas, is being on a multicultural team, because a multicultural team, you are working with individuals on a daily basis who function from different worldviews and different cultural patterns. And so it's the intensive, prolonged interaction with individuals that really helps one uncover these differences and how you have to function differently. And I think I brought Pludemann's book. I think you're going to enjoy Pludemann's book. In fact, he's the one who discusses what we talked about earlier, these different leadership styles. And have you read that yet? You did it? Okay.
I remember it.
Yeah, so he talks about those leadership styles, and he gives some great illustrations of working on multinational teams on the mission field, where you have Swedes and Koreans and Americans and Africans together. And so the Koreans, they want to do a 5 a.m. prayer meeting together with everyone, and the Swedes are upset that you're stealing from my family time. And so you have those kind of natural cultural collisions. Both are biblical. You need to pray, you need to be with your family, but it creates tensions. So learning to deal with those tensions. Number 3 is training. So, most multinational corporations have formal training seminars and programs to prepare and equip their people to go and serve overseas. Where are we at on time? Okay, good. If I ever run short, tell me, or run long, tell me. In fact, that may be an occupation that you might want to get into. You could go work for a multinational corporation and do cross-cultural leadership development. Number 4, transfers. So this has to do with actually not just traveling, not doing the in and out thing where you go, not just doing summer missions or spring break missions, but go live on the field for a year or 2, or 3 or 4 or 5. That's where it really sinks in. When you're living there and you're immersed in the culture. And the literature says that it typically takes an expatriate 2 years of living in a foreign culture to develop a new cognitive mindset to lead effectively in that new culture. My belief is that can be sped up. We can speed that up by how immersed you are in the culture. Are you staying in a host home? Are you immersed in language acquisition? Because a lot of the guys and gals who do global leadership in multinational organizations, they don't do either of those. They live in that compound, they live in that high rise. Sometimes they get shuttled back and forth from their home to their office. They're not taking the local metro. So the immersion is more limited. They can do all their business in English. English is the business kind of language around the world, and so they don't get the language immersion. But I think those things can speed up that process. All right. Yeah, so 80% of expats, 80% of global leaders who have been interviewed said that this is the most significant of all 4. This is the most significant means of developing cross-cultural leadership competencies. All right, and what happens is you have to go through culture shock. So we've talked about that before. When you go into a new culture, you have a honeymoon period, then you hit this period where you hate it. You have to get beyond that to the point where now I've adapted. Now I've embraced parts of it. I like parts of it. Yeah, I'm able to live with parts I don't really like, but I've learned how to function now in this new place. All right. There's questions, thoughts, comments. Well, you get to go early. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Have you started on your cross-cultural analysis?
Yeah. I kind of had a question about, talking about the possibly the high context cultures in our paper.
Yeah.
Can you basically just talk about anything along those subjects involving our culture, like when you look it up on the website?
Yeah, so here's the deal. Focus your cross-cultural analysis not on describing Hofstede's dimensions or Edward Hall's cultural factors. We're going to assume that you know them, okay? So what you're going to do, you're focused on the application of them. What you describe your country culture in those terms. Is it high context? Is it low context? You tell us in your paper.
Yeah, you don't have to open it.
But flesh it out. Give examples. How does that look in that culture? So you're going to describe what the specific dimensions are and how it looks. You don't have enough time in your paper you're writing to us in this missions class. We know what the dimensions are, but you're going to give it an application to your country, and then you're going to compare and contrast with our country. But go beyond those things. As you dig into your country, you're going to discover cultural aspects